Good afternoon. It's great to see the large group here today, and we have well over 100 people on live stream. So let's give them a big round of applause. Give yourselves a big round of applause. I'd like to thank you for coming today, especially on the start of a busy winter quarter. I also like to welcome many of our guests from our city. I'll introduce a few in county. And also I know we have some of our partners who are here for the career fair in the room today. So I'd like to make some introductions, and please hold your applause. Would you please stand? Mayor Heidi Harmon. Of course. Round of applause. Our city manager, Derek Johnson. City council member and Cal Poly Alumni Association president, Erica Stewart. Keith Agassar, our interim fire chief. Thank you, Keith. And then we had our CSU board meeting this week, and I believe I saw Thomas Fowler IV come in the room. Thomas? Thomas Fowler. Professor Fowler was recognized among 5 individuals yesterday for the Wong Award of Excellence, and he was selected among the 23 CSU campuses to receive the Teaching Award. That is amazing. Very Cal Poly proud. I would also mention to you that yesterday several police officers across the system were recognized for their life-saving and points of valor. Chad Riley, one of our officers, was recognized for his work in the past, really intervening and saving the life of a student on campus. And so I know he's busy today working, but let's give Officer Riley a round of applause. You know, today is mainly a day for looking ahead, but I want to take a few moments this morning and let's look back just a bit. Today is, I believe, a point for us, a point in the road. Sometimes it's straight, sometimes it's curvy, and sometimes there are obstacles, but this is a point in the road for us that I think we'll look back and remember, and it's very important. So before we kick off this new initiative, it's appropriate to look back, and it's also appropriate to thank some individuals. As a candidate for this position many years ago, it was almost 8 years ago, I was in this very room with, as many people are here today, answering questions about the future of Cal Poly, and diversity and inclusion was on the minds of the faculty and staff and students. I think it's even more so on our minds today. It was very much on the minds of the search committee. But at that point, the university already had a history of moving forward. We had a history of both looking at diversity and the atmosphere of inclusion of our community members. We included diversity learning objectives in our university learning objectives in 2008. The next year, the Inclusive Excellence Council was created, and many of you remember Dr. David Kahn, who was involved with that. And in 2010, the Office of University Diversity and Inclusivity, now with a slightly different name, Audi, was established. And we've taken many, many more steps. So my point for mentioning the past is not for self-congratulation, nor to say that all the work has been done. We know we have much to do, but it's really to say thank you. Thank you to each and every one of you who insisted on the moral rightness of diversity and inclusion, the essential part of inclusive excellence as part of student success, and you insisted on this moral rightness when colleagues or peers just didn't get it, when even those who were sympathetic in principle did too little or did things at the wrong times, and you also persevered through turbulent times because it was not only the right thing to do, but a moral imperative for Cal Poly. As many people have said, learn by doing is not complete without diversity and inclusion. And that's important for student success. And I see a person that I missed, our student body president, Jasmine Fashami. Would you please wave? Give her a big round of applause. Because this is about the future and moving forward. So you did not give up. You kept moving. So I want to thank everyone who served on a committee or served as a mentor, everyone who's been part of a faculty staff association, a council, everyone who especially has worked lately on our collective impact process. And let's remember, that's been going for 2 years. And also, thank you to everyone that has spoken up and protested at times and demanded that Cal Poly be better and do better. So I want to thank each and every one who's taken risks to achieve a campus that is welcoming and inclusive. And we have more work to do. That's why we're here today. And so there are times when we're on our journey and you're on a sharp curve and you can look back and you can look forward. So it's appropriate that we take just a moment this morning and look back and thank everyone here. And I think a good example of a person that we should thank is Dr. Camille O'Brien, who received the Legacy MLK Award as an example. And I'll go back to, again, my interview over 8 years ago. And Dr. O'Brien asked me some really pointed questions that day, and she's continued to do that every day. So have many of you, students, faculty, and staff. And that's what Learn by Doing is about. Learn by Doing is about getting better, being better. That's what today's about. So next, I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Jamie Patton, who is one of those who's in most recent past and is helping us look forward. So please welcome Dr. Jamie Patton from Student Affairs.
Thank you, President Armstrong. On behalf of Cal Poly, I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land that we meet on today carries heritage and culture of the indigenous people of San Luis Obispo County, the Yaqui, Tichu, Yaktahini, Northern Chumash tribe. We honor the indigenous people's connection to these territories and respect the land on which we gather here today. President Armstrong acknowledged in his remarks that some of the changes that have occurred here at Cal Poly. These changes were evident even in 2017 when I chose to join the Mustang family. By elevating the Office of University Diversity and Inclusion, learning about the movements like love, empathy, respect that has reverberated the campus and actually led now to a student group being created, and again, understanding that we all should expect and give respect to others daily. It's time for transformational change here at Cal Poly, and I'm excited to see the acceleration of this work. It's happening very importantly within our student body. Students are organizing and working with faculty, staff, and administration to understand their struggles and to acquire the support that they need, letting us know the support that they need. Students from different communities are engaging in conversations about diversity and inclusion. This is becoming evident by the numerous calls by the Multicultural Center and cross-cultural centers into my office almost daily for them to have additional opportunities to learn about themselves and other cultures. In essence, just hoping to find ways to increase their cultural competence and genuinely connect with students who have different identities. I was so proud even last year looking at our ASI student government where they reallocated funds to provide additional resources for social justice programming, in addition to creating a standing committee for diversity and inclusion to help address the concerns of our minority students in the communities, and creating a position within the executive cabinet, all within 1 year. That's our associated students. Over the past year, we've had, and I've been involved in several deep discussions with our Greek students. Discussions with them that I've walked away encouraged that we are in a better place than where we started. So much so that I was with them till 9 o'clock last Friday night. And they were engaged, and we could have continued that dialogue, and I believe they did, and we're still connecting and communicating about that. Change continues to happen within our colleges and faculty with the creation of spaces and forums of direct lines of communication with all of our students. Faculty are engaging students in the classroom around diversity and encouraging respectful discourse about the challenges we face as a campus and community. The mere fact that hundreds of faculty members have participated in workshops provided by Audi that focus on hidden bias, unmasking microaggressions, our teaching sessions further underscore the importance for this needed change. Many faculty have voluntarily participated in book circles offered by the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology, in addition to those offered by Human Resources. This helps all of us as we transition our efforts to enhance diversity, equity, and inclusion. I've also watched change occur last year during the collective impact process, where faculty and staff thought critically about how we can improve our campus and presented several well-thought-out recommendations. Change is happening, continues to happen within student affairs, where the senior leadership team decided very, very early on last spring to focus all of our strategic efforts in providing the best co-curricular experience to all of our students, both new and returning. Programs like new student and transition programs shifted their curriculum to be sure that students entering our community know the expectations about being an inclusive community. The cross-cultural centers have added programs like the State of Events that allow students to share their experience and engage in discussions that others understand the challenges of being a minoritized person on our college campus, all the while continuing with student advocacy, providing a space for different communities to gather and come together, and answering the call of support that they get from faculty and staff, not to mention supporting students with Polycultural Weekend and Culture Fest and everything that they were already doing. It's happening in our residence halls. It's helping in our health center and many different places throughout student affairs. Last week, across the Pedway, we celebrated the life and legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, and I close with my favorite quote that I feel speaks to where we are. He said, "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands in times of controversy." We're at a time of controversy here at Cal Poly, and I'm humbled to serve where we've decided to tackle this head on. This is why I chose to join the leadership of student affairs at Cal Poly. There's an unwavering commitment. I see that commitment every day in visible ways like the ones that I mentioned and small acts of inclusion. We are truly one Cal Poly. And now, would you join me in welcoming to the podium our champion of champions and leader of diversity, equity, and inclusion on our campus, Dr. Jozi De Leon.
Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. Thank you all for being here. I want to thank Dr. Patton and President Armstrong for their remarks. This is a great day, and I'm delighted to be part of this great event. I can't tell you how good it is to work at a university where the senior leadership is 100% on the right side of supporting diversity and inclusion. I know from personal experience how demoralizing it can be to work and study at a school where the leadership is either hostile or indifferent to improving the campus climate. That just isn't the case here, and that is why I came to Cal Poly. That doesn't mean that we get it right all the time, but I see all of us pulling in the right direction, and that makes a big difference. It's clear to me that the road ahead is one that takes us toward greater diversity and inclusion. That's great news for three main reasons. First of all, because creating a more diverse and inclusive campus is morally the right thing to do. Second, because doing so will allow everyone, students, faculty, and staff, to thrive in ways that aren't possible in a less representative and less welcoming campus. And third, because having a curriculum and co-curriculum that reflect and reinforce that diversity and inclusion will give everyone on campus the greatest opportunity for learning, growth, and will maximize learn by doing. How do we get there? The collective impact approach that I brought to Cal Poly in 2017 is rooted in the recognition that inclusion and diversity is not and cannot be the responsibility of one person or one office. Rather, creating a diverse and inclusive campus is a long-term task that every single campus citizen can help with, and ultimately that each of us must help with in order for us to achieve our goal. Our collective impact work unified our campus in some very important work. The recommendations that have been developed after much thought and work by dedicated individuals have uncovered what is important to our campus in moving us forward. We have paid attention and listened to what has been recommended. Recommendations make reference to having the whole campus engaged in diversity and inclusion work and ensuring accountability in delivering on goals to create change. We heard you when you recommended that we engage the campus in a campus experience survey. We heard our students when they asked that they needed to have an experience here that was better, to create an environment where all difference was valued, respected, and understood. That is why we are here today. Today, Dr. Damon Williams is here to talk about how Cal Poly is to become the place that it can be, that we know it can be. Dr. Williams is a nationally recognized diversity leadership and organizational change expert. He will serve as a friend and partner in our efforts over the next 12 months. I know that some of you have already had a chance to meet or hear Dr. Williams when he visited our campus this past fall and again last week. For those of you who didn't, I'll tell you that Dr. Williams is a leader, scholar, and educator who heads the National Inclusive Excellence Leadership Academy, or NICSLA, which a group of us were a part of this past summer. He also heads the Center for Strategic Diversity Leadership and Social Innovation. Dr. Williams has worked with more than 1,000 colleges and universities, Fortune 100 companies, and nonprofit organizations. The most important thing about Dr. Williams is that he really cares. He wants to help institutions transform and to move forward through inclusive excellence. He calls himself the chief catalyst for a reason, and you'll see him in full form in that role. Dr. Williams and his team will work with Cal Poly to spark conversations, gather data, and construct training and professional development programs to support our community throughout our inclusive excellence journey. The results of this work will be concrete and measurable, something that I have heard over and over that we really, really should strive for. It will result in an actionable report, more than 1,000 trained members of our community to enable them to deliver on an action plan and a clear evidence-based understanding of our campus experience to drive change on a daily basis. But there will also be other immeasurable results over time. A student feeling more comfortable in the classroom, a professor initiating a challenging conversation that opens up minds to new ideas, a ubiquitous sense of acceptance that encourages exploration and collaboration. And these changes are what will truly set Cal Poly on the track to be the best institution we can possibly be, one that lives inclusive excellence daily. Everyone, it is my pleasure, and I would like you to have me join me in welcoming Dr. Damon Williams.
Cal Poly, what's good? Now, those of you who've seen me before know I always begin with a big question. I said, Cal Poly, what's good? Come on now. We're what's good. My name is Damon Williams, and it is absolutely my true pleasure to be here. As Dr. DeLeon noted, to be here amongst friends. Friends that I've had a chance to get to know in a very small way, and with my colleagues and my team in a larger way, we'll get to become not only friends but partners in the incredibly important work that you've been doing. I know as I look around the room and see several of you across this room, I know that you have been involved in this work not for a day, not for a week, not for a month, not for a semester, not just because some incident happened on campus, but you've been involved in this conversation for a lifetime. I know that I look across this room and I see friends, I see colleagues, I see individuals who've been a part of this work in so many important ways as you have grappled with the framework, the ideas, the conversation that has happened here around collective impact. See, collective impact is one of the key concepts that I believe is so important to catalyze change across complex organizations that are dealing with complex and difficult challenges. This opportunity to come together to ask, where's our North Star vision? What are going to be the key action steps that are going to help us to get there? What are the common indicators that we're going to need to track and to measure progress over time? This is the type of work that my life has been fueled by. I am the author of Strategic Diversity Leadership and the Chief Diversity Officer, available on Amazon.com. Don't play. And importantly, my life and my career as a scholar, my life and my career as a leader, and my life and my career as an educator have all focused around what one of my dear colleagues, Cliff Conrad of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, referred to as the burning questions. Show of hands if you are a member of the faculty here today. Show of hands if you are a member of the staff community here today. Show of hands if you are a student that's here in the room today. Woo, 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 give it up for the students. Each and every one of us is driven often by things that burn inside of us that we want to understand. When I worked at the Boys and Girls Clubs of America, one of the things I was most proud of is doing work early on with littles and tweens and teens that ultimately became collegiates to help them to understand their spark, the thing inside them that they wanted to be focused into. Every student has a spark. Every faculty member with a research agenda has a spark. You who work, who make our institution run every day, there's a spark. My spark has been driven by several burning questions. One is, so what is diversity in the 21st century, and why is it so important in what we refer to as a connection economy? A world in which we live today, where we are more connected by social media and the ubiquity of being able to constantly connect with somebody, but yet a world in which we're becoming more tribal in nature. A world in which we're becoming more divided between left and right, R's and D's, progressives and conservatives. Oftentimes not finding the pathway to a democratic experience where we come together in conversation. My career, my life has been powered by trying to understand how do we create the broad context of diversity and inclusion without losing the sight of unique group needs and realities. A conversation that is both race and ethnicity, both economic background, both gender, both LGBTQIA, both disability. How do we engage the broad conversation of diversity and inclusion, creating the big tent where each and every one of us is a part of that conversation, irrespective of our background? Whether you're a white male, whether you're a person of color, whether you are someone who is new to our country, whether you are a person who is here, who is full 100% Pell Grant eligible, how do we create the big tent conversation for students, faculty, and staff to be engaged in a perfect conversation that can only be had together, can only be had through collective impact? The reports that you've done, the recommendations that you've built, all the ideas are there. What's missing in so many ways, though, is how do you take the ideas and activate the ideas? See, there's three notions. Do we have the money? Do we have the strategy? And do we have the will? Oftentimes, we let ourselves think that change is purely a matter of the resources and the strategy. But what I found, probably more than anything, change is about the will. It's about the will of community members as students, faculty, and staff, irrespective of where you find yourself, leaning into possibility and trying to push hard as you can to try to get something done and to create change. Change that can be seen and can be felt, not just change that lives in words and flowery speeches like the one that I'm giving here today. See, I am prone to rhetorical flourish. But don't get it twisted. I'm all about that execution. One of the things that we used to talk about at the Boys and Girls Clubs of America, where I spent 5 years as a senior vice president and chief education officer for all the clubs globally, is that we want to be passionate about the mission, but we want to be serious about the business. And so as I talk about this Cal Poly Inclusive Excellence Action Plan Initiative, yes, we want to be passionate about the mission, but we've got to be very serious about the business of advancing an agenda. Serious about the business of getting evidence-based understanding. Serious about the business of applying evidence-based practices against the collective impact recommendations to ultimately bring them to life over time. Now, I believe that now is a time of moving from awareness to action to innovation. I talk about innovation a lot inside of my work. And in fact, when I first had the opportunity to meet President Armstrong, and I am a fan of President Armstrong, we talked about innovation. We talked about how do you move faster. We talked about this idea of how do we get the information that we need over the next couple months, but more importantly, what are we going to do to take these collective impact recommendations that so many of you have poured into, that Dr. De Leon has been a leader in helping to bring to life? How do we pour into that in a way that spurs more action? And I believe the key is more innovation. When I talk about the idea of innovation, I oftentimes will rely upon the work of Dyer, Greger, and Christensen, the Harvard University business faculty who wrote the book, The Innovator's DNA. Wonderful, wonderful book that I recommend for all of you to get for your leadership libraries right after you go get strategic diversity leadership. But inside of that work, one of the first things that they say is that innovators have these key characteristics in common. Innovators are always questioning their world. Why is it that we can't seem to improve the campus experience for underrepresented students and community members? Why is it that we can't seem to get more of this group into senior leadership roles? Why is it that white males perhaps feel frozen and as if they can't be a part of the conversation of diversity, equity, and inclusion? Why is it that we have disparities in educational outcomes or disparities in terms of the number of women in STEM? Why is it? See, innovators are always asking questions. And one of the things that I will say is that if you're not asking questions, then chances are you're not innovating. Innovators are also looking for solutions wherever they can find them. Wherever they see a solution that works, they're looking for those solutions. Innovators know that innovation doesn't happen, as Dr. De Leon said, through one Audi office who's doing great work. Innovation happens through a collective agenda of many. But see, this is the trick. We talk about a collective agenda of many, but what we oftentimes don't talk about is how do you create a collective agenda of many? How do you create infrastructures in schools and colleges? How do you create ways of planning and framing the work that people can actually be a part of it? How do you do that from an evidence-based perspective? And see, innovators, and this is one of the things, and we're just in the shadow of Silicon Valley, a place that is a hotbed of innovation for so many ways, many reasons. And inside of innovation, what we know is that innovators also have a bias towards experimentation. They try things, they move forward with things, they do things. And once they figure out what works, they want to then go big. There were recommendations that were in the collective impact report that we needed to do more diversity and inclusion, leadership, professional development, and training. And as a result, all first-year students went through an introductory experience around diversity and inclusion. Thank you, Dr. Patton, and the leaders in student affairs and others who partnered there. Also, too, there was a recommendation that this is not just about the student experience, it's about the faculty and the staff experience as well. And when I was here a couple weeks ago, one of the things that was talked about through some colleagues in Audi is that at this point, we've taken north of 6,000 persons through introductory experiences to unconscious bias and microaggression and various different topics. And so even as I beg the question and I elevate the challenge of a need for more innovation, I also want to make sure that I am careful to say that innovation is happening here in this work, in this space, each and every day, and is connected to your collective impact plan and the recommendations that are already there. But the thing that I found, and this was not reflected in the Dyer, Greger, and Christensen framework, and this framework is fantastic, but there was a sixth characteristic that was so important, and that if this characteristic is not present, then diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts oftentimes will sit on the shore and never launch to sea and never reach their final destination point. And that is we need more and more leaders who are courageous. That as we begin the process of talking about an inclusive excellence campus-wide survey, deans who will make it a priority with their department chairs, who will make it a priority with their faculty, who will make it a priority with their staffs, who will make it a priority with students, student leaders who are willing to carry the message to their friends in the residence halls, in their student organizations, in the dining room to say, hey, every Cal Poly voice needs to be heard. We don't want 10% response rate. We don't want 20% response rate. We want 70 or 80% response rate. And that only happens through many different voices carrying the conversation forward and saying, did you complete your survey? Did you have your voice heard? Because, see, one of the things that we can do in terms of our team is we can design things. But if the community doesn't activate and respond to things, then we won't have the information that is required. And whenever we stand up and have our voices to be heard, whether it's in a public space, whether it's in a one-to-one conversation or it's in a small group, when we poke and cut against the norm, it requires us to be courageous. And so as we talk about this idea of collective impact and inclusive excellence and change institutionally, what we're talking about is how do all of us become a bit more courageous in our work each and every day. I spend a lot of time talking about this idea of everyday inclusion, not just when we're having the big event or the big lecture or the wonderful MLK speaker. How many of you saw Dr. West when he was here? Give some love for Dr. West. I heard he ripped it up. That all of these ideas become important. When I talk about this notion of inclusive excellence, I'm talking about it broadly. I'm talking about it in terms of access and equity, right? So we're asking the question, how are we doing in terms of recruitment and retention and student success and leadership succession of women and time to tenure and time to full, and what do we look like at the ranks of full when disaggregated? We're talking about issues of access and equity, students, faculty, and staff. When we talk about this idea of diversity and inclusive excellence in the 21st century, we're also begging the question, how are we preparing all of our students, undergrad and grad, to be leaders in a world that is diverse, global, and interconnected? How are we preparing them to be able to see the world from others' perspectives? How are we preparing them to live each and every day with empathy? So much of success in organizational life is about what we refer to as the, quote, soft skills, the socio-emotional abilities to see the world from others' perspective, to be empathetic to the needs of others, to ask questions that allow you to get more fundamentally connected, because connection is the hallmark of getting things done. But it's not just access and equity and preparing students. It's the important work that happens amongst our faculty. and some of our staff that are also member of the educational, instructional community. It's what's happening in terms of the research and the scholarship that's engaging and asking critical questions as we pursue grants and do important work in the classroom. But at the center of this model, and one of the key dimensions that connects us all in this conversation, is the degree to which we have a campus experience that is inclusive and multicultural and allows for all of us to live our best life, to be our best self in this environment. Whether you are President Armstrong or a member of the senior-most leadership team, or you are an incredibly important part of the foundation of our institution that works in administrative support, that works in custodial service, or works in some other area that each and every day, if they don't get up and do their jobs at a high level, the institution is crippled. Let alone the experience of our students in the classroom and outside the classroom. One of my dear colleagues, Dr. Beverly Tatum, who's the author of Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together at the Cafeteria Table and Other Conversations of Race, another book for your leadership library. I just see it right now. Strategic Diversity Leadership, The Innovator's DNA, The Chief Diversity Officer, and Why Are the Black Kids? I'm telling you, you got those 4 books, you are rolling downhill from there. But this idea that Dr. Tatum refers to as the ABCs. And she says that at the end of the day, the work that we must do is about the ABCs. It's about affirming identity. It's about building community. And it's about cultivating leaders. And see, I believe that in the academy, too often, we talk about the idea of cultivating leaders as it relates to our students. But we don't turn a self-reflective lens upon ourselves and ask, how are we on a self-directed learning journey to be better leaders as faculty, better leaders as deans, better leaders as department chairs, better leaders as student affairs leaders, better leaders wherever you find yourself each and every day. How do we do that? And that's what this wonderful initiative and this incredible work that we will do together is about. The Cal Poly Inclusive Excellence Action Plan Initiative has several goals. One is we want to create even more powerful of a shared vision and an excitement around advancing the collective impact work into its next phase. This is about lifting that work and finding ways to creatively be a part of it moving forward. It's not about moving away from it. It's about lifting it up because there's wonderful, wonderful ideas and recommendations there. And it's about further clarifying the how with action plan and also emboldening the why with data. It's about developing and putting into the world an inclusive excellence experience survey and also conversations to allow for us to get quantitative data and community voice to inform a report. And we're looking forward to doing that in the next several months, launching the survey on April 9th. Now, the thing about this survey that I will say is that I am a social scientist. I do various different quantitative and qualitative projects. Research excites me as a scholar. As a change agent, research only excites me to the degree to which the research is an input into us doing something differently with the data. What has happened is, in many regards, what we've invested in is doing studies that just become a nice, new, shiny study that you put up on the shelf right next to strategic diversity leadership. Oh, I got my strategic diversity that I never cracked the spine on, and now I'm going to take my wonderful campus climate binder with 500 charts and tables and stick that right up there too. That's not what we're interested in doing. What we want to do is use really, really sound social scientific techniques to collect information, but more importantly, we want to find ways to tell the story of your community, help you establish some important baselines, and help us to move forward as an institution to do something with those information now and into the future. It's one of the reasons when President Armstrong and I talked about this at the recommendation of Dr. De Leon that excited me. I was at Boys and Girls Clubs of America doing really, really important work, and I made a decision to follow my heart and follow my passion to move in another way, to try to add value and to be a partner and a friend to institutions that wanted to get something done like this one. not institutions that just wanted a press release, not institutions that just wanted to get a campus climate experience survey done to create a smokescreen, but institutions that wanted to struggle with it, that wanted to try to find a pathway forward in a more powerful and innovative manner. It's also creating action institutes, as Dr. De Leon noted, where we come together and we actually grapple with how do you actually put into place the collective impact recommendations? Students, faculty, staff, and leadership across the next year. So we will be gathering data, but we will also be having these various different institutes. And when we run the scroll, to determine who did what, I am not a believer in mandatory requiring of quote unquote diversity training or diversity professional development. I don't believe in that. What I believe is creating great leadership development experiences, creating an expectation that we're going to do it, and then we count to see who did it and who didn't. Because I do believe you have to count things. But what first is most important is creating a great experience and asking, how do we take these collective impact recommendations and put them in that institute experience to drive forward, to understand what does it mean to lead strategically in this work? How do we put in place best practices around campus climate? What does it mean to take the collective impact recommendation around various different topics and bring them to life in your day-to-day work and in your leadership work with courage? How do we recruit and retain more diverse faculty and staff? And how do we engage these things in the classroom? And there may be other topics. This is just at a high level given where we are today. And how do we take all of the information that we collect and how do we bring it down and boil it into an action plan, right? We're not just going to say we want accountability, but how are we going to bring accountability to life in an action plan? We're not just going to say we want to get to this outcome, but how do we bring it together in the operational steps? Because as I noted before, I'm very passionate about the mission of diversity and inclusion, the vision of that possibility, but I believe it's so important for us to be so serious about the executional discipline that's required to help us to get there. So it's a both-and proposition. Now, when we talk about this idea, and I'm going to go deep here just for 1 second. I've got 2 slides, and I want to open this up for a Q&A. When we talk about this idea of understanding the campus climate, understanding the experience of our students, faculty, and staff, and the idea is to deploy a survey that will allow for every student, faculty, and staff to have an opportunity to respond over a 4 to 5 week period this academic year beginning April 9th. We know that a framework is required. Dr. Sylvia Hurtado, one of my dear colleagues at UCLA, who leads the Higher Education Research Institute, created a well-worn and well-respected framework that has now been used many times over, which talks about our campus climate as having multiple different dimensions. Externally, it talks about the government and policy context. Think about Proposition 209, right? And how that impacted the policy context of the state and the higher education institutional environment. Also, too, the socio-historical context. Look at what's happening right now at a great institution like UNC Chapel Hill and what's going on regarding monuments. That's nested in their socio-historical context, which permeates our institutions because they are porous in nature. But when we start looking inside of our institutions, there's other different dynamics as well that inform the campus climate and experience. What's the history of inclusion or exclusion? There's these stories that will live forever in the institutional imagination of a campus that you wonder, how did a first-year student in 2019 know about some incident that happened 8-9 years ago? It's because it's in that institutional historical context. And it's also the demographics of our institutions and what they look like at the student, faculty, and staff level, which plays a role in everything that happens from there. But when we talk about studying and gathering data and information on our climate and that environment experience, we're generally talking about 2 and oftentimes 3 different ways of gathering information. One, we want to gather the psychological dimension. Do I feel a sense of belonging as a member of the faculty and I'm a woman? Do I feel a sense of alienation as a member of the student community and I am transgendered? Do I feel a sense of safety as I am in this institutional environment. And so there'll be psychological dimensions that are perceptual in nature, but there will also be behavioral dimensions where we're asking the question, what are your behavioral patterns on campus? For example, are you involved in affinity organizations that reflect your identity? Are you having conversations with faculty or staff? It's asking questions that are behavioral in nature. And last and definitely not least, it's asking questions about your perception of institutional commitment, right? Do we perceive that Cal Poly is committed to this work? Do we perceive that we're putting in place the action steps to help us move forward? And what is beautiful is as we gather this information, we will have baseline. And from baseline, we can now identify some key indicators, create a scorecard, and on a time basis moving forward, come back and gather information to see where we are. Now, one of the reasons why it's important to do this study now is because the institution has experienced various different scenarios and challenges that the community has been a part of. And we want to capture that to get this baseline. If we wait till the fall, there'll be thousands of participants in our community that are gone and thousands of new folks that are coming in. So it's an opportunity for us to get a just-in-time set of information that we can build from and grow from and improve from as we move now and into the future, and understanding that all of these dynamics are interconnected, but as we're talking about the survey, we'll connect and gather that information in these three different dimensions. Now, one of the wonderful things that we have as a benefit to our process is we have several instruments that are in the open source arena developed by the University of Michigan, which has recently invested in this similar type of work, and we can build from some of that instrumentation, which gives us an incredible benefit moving forward. They have developed some new state-of-the-art surveys that allow for us to capture the various different complexities of even talking about diverse identities in the 21st century, different than we would have 10, 15 years ago. Diverse identities in terms of sexuality, gendered expressions, various different ways that just weren't a part of the many surveys that were put in place, but now are more and more a part of the information we need to collect. Also, those instruments have been validated. Scales have been constructed by leading social scientists, and we will be able to rely upon those instruments and those scales as we're moving forward inside of this work. My final slide, and then I'd love to have some questions from anybody here in the community who would be interested. One is that we will develop a multidimensional database. And that database ultimately, and I don't know the timeline it will, but ultimately it'll become an open source database that you'll be able to actually do more research, students, faculty, staff, and leadership against that database, which I think is very exciting. There are very few databases in the country that are open source in nature that can allow you to ask some of the types of research questions that this database will allow for. It will also produce a report that will talk about the student, faculty, and staff experience. It will also power the development of these inclusive excellence action institutes, and it will allow for us to have clear, formal recommendations on how to support moving those collective impact ideas into life. Not just putting an idea out, but putting even more underneath how we bring it to life, and there's already things underneath it, but even more. And lastly, a scorecard and recommendations to help for us to create a cadence of accountability now and into the future. I know that myself, President Armstrong, Dr. DeLeon, and Dr. Patton covered a tremendous amount of information. And I know that some of you maybe are at a transition point where you maybe need to go. Some can stay. I would love to entertain a couple questions from anybody in the audience and the community that would like to offer. And I believe we've got some mic runners that are here in the room. Questions from anybody? I love it. The middle of the room is just rooted. They're like, we ain't going nowhere. We got some questions we want to ask. I love it. I love it. Where are mic runners at?
I've got one right. I've got a mic here. Dr. Williams?
Oh, yes.
Hi.
Yes. Hello.
I'm Deborah Valencia-Laver. I'm an associate dean in the College of Liberal Arts. and a member of the Chicanx Latinx Faculty Staff Association. My question, I know in the last survey, one of the concerns was that if you had negative experiences here at Cal Poly, it actually took you a lot longer to fill out the survey. Yeah. And that was sometimes very troubling. You know, it could be triggering to people, as well as, again, maybe discouraging. And I don't know if this new survey, in a sense, will kind of create opportunities for people to feel encouraged to expose those negative situations that they may have gone through, and also do it in sort of a timely manner, be able to come back to the survey, for example, or other kinds of things. Could you talk to that a little bit?
So a couple of things. One, this type of research by nature in asking the question is going to evoke responses that can be triggering in some ways of some past trauma, some past challenges, some past dynamics. And as an individual makes their contribution, that can play itself out. And the more open-ended opportunity people have to free write, the more that can play out. There will be open-ended opportunity to respond. At the same time, we know that there's a thing called survey fatigue and over-surveying. And we've got to balance the need to have opportunity for open-ended response with the need to ensure that people are able to get in and out of this survey in 15 to 20 minutes tops. And then if you're doing open-ended, maybe it's more on top of that. But we want people to be able to get in and out of the survey in 12, 15 minutes. And if they're going longer or want to consider, maybe they take a bit more time. The other thing that I will say is this, and it's that individuals will have an opportunity, if you start it, to stop and come back and finish it. However, once you hit submit, it will go into a final form and you won't be able to come back and revise. But there will be an opportunity to stop and continue forward. That's a best practice in this type of research, particularly given that so many, particularly our students, are going to do it on their mobiles. And they're going to, maybe start it and not quite complete it, come back to it. So that will be a possibility. The third piece I'd like to respond in terms of your very well articulated question, and this actually elevated when I was here last week and spoke with about 80 or so people that are in various different committees and roles on campus. And that same question emerged, and it emerged more from a health and wellness and safety perspective, right? So how do you create a psychological place for that person to go if some trauma is elevated? And so we will work with leadership here to make that also a part of what we do. So, for example, I could see a world when you get your communication saying your survey has now been accepted. There could be guidance in that. If you'd like to, these services are available. Please, take advantage of them. So we will build that into the process. A wonderful question. Anyone else? Someone else? Yes, right over here. Yes.
Dr. Williams, thank you so much. This is really exciting.
I'm excited too.
Such opportunity. You talked about the 70 to 80% that we're really, shooting for. And as a staff member, how can we reach out to, well, first of all, what is the traditional group that is underrepresenting themselves in these type of surveys? And as a staff member, how can we kind of help with that encouragement at a kind of a micro level, please?
Yeah, so
thank you.
Wonderful question. So a couple of different things. One, staff oftentimes will respond to these if they feel safe. We found that staff will tend to respond in a higher percentage than faculty and students if they feel it's a safe context to do. And you should feel safe because none of your information, none of your data will be privy to university administration. It will come directly to me. So you should feel very safe in that. One of the things I will say is that often we have real challenges in terms of getting student response. So students in general are underrepresented as it relates to a response category because they are so pulled in so many different directions, and it's difficult to get them to really lock in and complete survey. Also, if we double click into faculty, staff, and students and start to look at those three big buckets disaggregated by group, we know that individuals of underrepresented minority background, from a race ethnicity perspective, oftentimes are less likely to respond. We know that individuals of diverse sexual orientations and identity expressions are oftentimes less likely to respond. And so one of the things that we want to over-index and over-rotate in communication is that there's anonymity and there's safety in offering your response, and that if we don't get a strong cell count disaggregated by group, we can't make meaningful comparisons because the numbers are too small. So the last part of what I'll say in responding to your question is we will be moving forward and providing a lot of guidance on what folks can do. So I have a hope and a dream. You know, we just celebrated the MLK holiday. I have a dream too. I have a dream that Cal Poly would achieve an 80% overall response rate across all various different groups. But one of the things that we know that's going to take to get us there is we're going to have to create a massive amount of energy around this and a real campaign that leads into April. And we're going to need for leaders like yourselves to, when the survey launch, walking down the hallway, say, hey, I baked these cookies today. Did you respond to the survey? I did a global study for the Kellogg Foundation one time, and there was a wonderful leader, member of our team, and she created a cookie cart activation incentive, right? And she was literally moving around different spaces, but how do we create those everyday ways of getting folks to think, hey, oh, I didn't do that. Let me go and do that now. Oh, I don't see it. Oh, it's probably in your junk folder. Pull it out. But we've got to be doing that, students, faculty, and staff, in a lot of different places. When I dream my hope of hopes, my dream of dreams, it would be that we would have survey activation times that our faculty would create a nice 20-minute slot for their students to complete a survey at the beginning of the class. When I dream my hope of hope and dream of dreams, that is the type of thing that we would like to see. So we will be creating multiple different activation guiding principles and working to empower an army of folks to be able to be responsive to the survey natively where they live so that we can be pushing that response rate each and every week in the time in which we're in data collection. Yes, right here. Yes.
You won't know the answer yet. I realize you won't know the answer yet because you haven't gotten the data and you haven't done the study. But just to help me visualize it a little bit, when we're talking about a scorecard for accountability that you're going to build based on some of these things, maybe based on work you've done with other groups, what is a concrete example? Do you mean like X number of people have done X training, or is that what, yeah?
Sure, great question. So if we were to go back to this slide and think about this slide maybe as potential dimensions of a scorecard. In the access and equity dimension, we might have 4 or 5 questions that you want to track over time that are related to student academic achievement or representation or women in STEM or 6-year graduation rate, things that maybe you traditionally collect all the time. However, in terms of a multicultural inclusive campus environment cell, how do you get that information if you're not collecting social science data? So inside of that cell, we may identify 5 key questions in the survey that we want to track over time. Or it may be a scale, which for those of you who are not quantitatively oriented, is taking multiple questions together and it hangs together from a factor analysis and is a scale. And we want to get a score on that scale, which may, for example, be feelings of belonging, right? So you want to have a belonging indicator that is the representation of the campus climate and environment dimension. And you want to track that moving forward, coming back periodically and doing further data collection. Let's go right here. Yes.
Hello. So I have 2 quick questions, that's okay? So I was wondering, would you recommend as a part of this inclusivity action any type of race-conscious or gender-conscious affirmative action? And secondly, I know you mentioned that one of your questions that you were asking was why white men don't seem to be getting involved. And I was wondering what role you think that white men could play in this inclusivity training and whatnot.
Great question. So the first one was in terms of race-conscious or gender-conscious affirmative action measures and recommendations. I don't necessarily know if that's in the scope of what will emerge from our data collection, per se. And as we know, that recommendation is one that can't be resolved institutionally. It's nested in the broader government and social policy context. And so if we go back to that model I talked about, campus climate is nested in that bigger context. That is a context that, candidly, none of us can move and influence alone. And so the nature of our recommendations is not necessarily for external audiences, it's more for internal audiences. The second thing I would say, and my exact words and thoughts were that we have to create a context where everybody feels that they're a part of this discussion, right? White males as well as everyone else. And what has happened over time is often the discussions move forward, and some, not all, feel as if they don't have a contribution to make because they're not a part of an identity group that has been historically underrepresented or marginalized in some way. Some use the term minoritized in some way. What I believe is that everybody's got to be a part of the conversation. And so what I'm hopeful to is that as we collect information, maybe we'll see information in there that helps us to, with more data-driven clarity, understand the differences of how people are participating and not participating. And then we can use that information as a part of our next generation professional development, orientation, work with our entire community, white males as well as others. Right there in the middle. Yes, sir.
Oh, right here.
And I'll take one more question after this.
As part of this inclusive excellence action plan, are there gonna be any resources provided to minorities, especially in the case of an incident happening as part of this plan?
It's a great question. One of the things that we will do is as we take the information, gather the information, we will make recommendations. A part of those recommendations, I would imagine, will touch on resources as well. What gets actually approved and what gets built will ultimately emerge out of the process. I don't know what that would be on the front end of it, but that will be a part of the recommendations that we would offer. They would inevitably touch on that as a part of those recommendations, for sure. Okay. Yes. One final question from anyone, anywhere. Yes, right here in the middle, yes.
I have two parts to this question. The first is, do you already have your surveys written? And if not, is there a plan to incorporate different stakeholders on campus like the FSAs or the student ASI groups? Great. My second question is, how available and accessible will that data be after the surveys are completed? I know in the past there was some concern about lack of accessibility of what the results actually were. We were given very brief notes about what was uncovered. And so I know in, President Armstrong has talked a lot about wanting to be transparent about lots of things and how much transparency is there going to be in the results.
Sure, great questions. So the first question in terms of instrumentation, one of the benefits that we are building from is that 30 of the leading social scientists in the world at the University of Michigan came together and looked at the various different surveys that were out there to study these issues in higher education. They then went through a very precise process to identify what they felt was the state-of-the-art instrumentation. The beauty of that instrumentation is they then put it into place. So it's already reliable and validated, and scales have been created. The ability to build from that starting point is fantastic. At the same time, that instrument may have some areas that we would want to ask questions of that are not in that survey. And so there will be a small group that will actually be looking at that to actually engage it, and will be adding something in that. For example, one of the questions that was not asked in the student survey was questions about the institutional environment beyond the institution, right? Meaning San Luis Obispo in this context, another city in that context. That's something that members said that's really, really important for us. So as we're working with this leadership group around this, we will be taking that into consideration and looking to make some shifts and additions around the edges. At the same time, you don't want to invalidate the scales and invalidate the instrument by changing the instrument too broadly. So it's a artful science of crafting it in that way. And then the other piece of it is you don't want to add so many questions on it that people don't complete it, and it starts creeping up in time, because that also then starts to impact response rate. So all this is a artful science of engagement. The other piece what was your second part of your question? How accessible are the results? Yes. The last part of your question, that's a great place to complete on, is, the idea is that once the information comes in, we're going to be cleaning the data, pulling these things together. And these institutes that I'm talking about, we're going to be talking about that data in these institutes. That'll be a part of what's delivered in that institute experience. Another part of it is there will be a report. And I'd imagine that report will be public to the institution. I would imagine there'll probably be some type of a forum. One of the recommendations of the collective impact report was there should be a fall forum. Well, had President Armstrong and Dr. De Leon and Dr. Patton and others not had the foresight to say, let's get the data now, what are we going to be talking about in the fall? We're going to go do the survey? No, now we're going to be able to, at that fall forum, which is a part of your collective impact recommendations, talk about absolutely where we are and what we know to be true. My greatest hope is that we'll get 80% response rate and we get a ton of turnout. My greatest fear is that we don't get a strong response rate. We need response rate. That is the only way that we can really meaningfully talk about this. I am not a believer in waiting and banging on the data and manipulating it in ways that are very aggressive when cell sizes are very small. It's important when you're doing a survey like this for everybody to have a chance to respond because of the nature of it. You could do some things on the front end that were psychometric in nature around survey and sampling. However, you then start not allowing for everybody to have a chance to respond. And I think everybody deserves a chance to respond, but we really got to push to get high response rate. You all have been fantastic for spending a little time this afternoon. I look forward to being a further friend and partner to your work. God bless each and every one of you. Thank you so much.
I want to thank our leadership, faculty, staff, community members, and especially our students for being here. I know there's probably going to be, a lot of information was thrown at you. So if you want more information, we're going to provide an opportunity for you to access some of that information. Let me scroll to where you can find that in just a minute. Well, going the wrong way. There it is. There it is. All right. So you can go to this website and find the information you received today and other information that might answer some of your questions. But we're also going to provide a vehicle for you to ask additional questions as we go through this process. We're building that so that we have this constant communication. Again, thank you very much. And we're so excited and happy that we're going through this process. Thanks again.